This is kind of a complex figure. The gist of it is we asked furries whether or not persona species influences whether you interact with someone. The media often asks us, because if they don't go to a furry con, so do all the dogs go in one room and all the cats go in one room and they don't talk to each other? Not really. We got a whole bunch of species in here. Not really what happens. So when you ask furries to what extent would a person's persona species affect whether you'd hang out with them, as the blue bars here, they tend to say not really, right? No, I wouldn't decide whether to hang out with someone based on their persona species. But if you look at the red and green bars, they tend to be skewed towards the right. That suggests that furries do think that a persona species tells me something about you, right? I may not choose to hang out with you or not based on your persona species, but knowing that you're a fox tells me a little bit about you, or knowing that I'm a cat tells you a little bit about me, right? They do seem to think that it's indicative of something. So, as it turns out, we can look into, are there stereotypes of certain personas? Do certain personas get a reputation? And so we asked this. The first thing we did was we asked, what are the stereotypes if they exist? Before we can test if they're true, we have to know what they are. So a few years ago, we did a study where we asked furries to list their persona species and then tell us 3 stereotypes that exist about that species. We took all this data and compiled it all together, and we found that certain species have traits that stand out as kind of stereotypical. So for example, for wolves, loyalty stood out as being this defining trait of the stereotype of wolf. When it came to foxes, sly tended to be the feature that came about as a stereotype of foxes. When it came to dragons, strength tended to be one of the most powerful features of stereotypes of what makes dragons dragons. When it comes to cats, yeah, I'm a little ashamed to be a cat in this moment there, but cats are a little bit lazy, I guess. Dogs, like wolves, very much about loyalty. Press F to pay respects for Seymour. Rabbits, stereotype often associated with being shy and timid. Otters, pretty one-dimensional. Otters are kind of just all about having fun, apparently. So, those are some of the stereotypes that exist about persona species. The next question we sort of challenged was, are there any truth to this? Is it true that people who are wolves are actually more likely to be loyal and foxes are actually more likely to be cunning or sly? And so what we did in the next study was we asked furries to take this personality test. We gave them a whole list of traits and said, which of these traits describes you? And only later on in the survey did we ask them what their persona species was. So we didn't prime them to think about these stereotypes. And so we found a little bit of evidence for some of the stereotypes. So for example, we found that wolves and dogs, people who have those as personas, tend to describe themselves as more loyal. People who pick foxes do tend to describe themselves as kind of sly, as kind of cunning. People who describe themselves as bears or wolves tend to say that they were strong and more than the average person did. Foxes and bears were more likely to be women, whereas cats were more likely to be women in the fandom. Some of these were stereotypes people would say that I could have called that in advance. There were also some surprising ones that emerged for us. So for example, there's a stereotype that exists about foxes in the fandom. As it turns out, foxes are not the most promiscuous species. As it turns out, that's wolves and dogs. It's also dogs who tend to be the most likely to be the least heterosexual of the different named persona species. They're also the most likely to be in a long-term relationship. And interestingly, it wasn't rabbits who were the most shy. As it turns out, foxes tend to be the most shy of the persona species. So again, some of the stereotypes, there's some truth to them. Other ones, totally out of left field. Right? So this suggests that maybe don't take the stereotypes all that seriously because some of them have support, some of them don't. Some of them are rather unfounded.